Information in this podcast is of general nature only. It does not take into account your personal needs or objectives. Before investing in any product, you need to consider your personal situation, needs and objectives. Always seek professional advice for your particular circumstances and needs prior to investing.
Morning, Lauren. How are you?
Hi, good, Dave. How are you?
I'm great. Now, it's been several weeks since you and I did one of these. We had celebrity guest Phil Roberts on my last recording a couple of weeks ago, which was really good. He's the source of all things good and noble in this world, is Phil. So it was great to have him for a couple of episodes. And how have you been? How's things in DHS world? What's been happening over there?
Yeah, good. Very busy. We're sort of, hitting that midway point of the year, and I think there's a lot of new development that's coming through, and people are hopeful to get completed by the end of the year. So lots of tenancy matching and demand discussions, and good and not so good properties coming out. So it's really good to be in touch with owners to be discussing those and figuring out a bit of a plan of action. So we've been very busy, but good busy.
And look, today, and when you say good and not so good properties, we're pretty passionate about giving investors out there and tenants and seal providers and support coordinators as much information as possible about all things SDA. And today is really a bit of a cautionary tale about how even at the top end of town, how a great big wealth management fund has fumbled a portfolio of SDA properties. So
that's right. Yeah.
For those that follow the financial markets and the AFR, the Australian Financial Review. So right now we're mid-July 2024. Last week, 10 days ago, a week ago or so, an article was released by AFR about a fund manager called, what do they call ASR Wealth, right?
ASR Wealth.
Selling and marketing a fund into Domicom. Now, Domicom's a fractional investment business. So if you're an investor with limited amount of funds, so fractional investing is if you're an investor, you might only have $100,000 to invest, but you'd like to participate in a big multi-million-dollar investment, you can invest a fraction into that investment in a fractional fund. This is the Domicom business model. So they allow mum and dad investors with smaller bits of capital to invest in much bigger infrastructure projects and much bigger housing projects like the one ASR Wealth marketed to Domicom. Now, you've read the article, Lauren?
I have, and I'm pleased to have somebody who really understands this stuff as well as the SDA market to discuss it with. So, when that article came out, and it's not the only one that the Fin Review's actually focused on with Domicom before. They have been in the Fin Review before as well, about 18 months ago. And look, Domicom is an interesting one because they offer a really great opportunity in terms of allowing smaller investors to partake in, a new investment product such as SDA, which can sometimes be quite expensive to do and to do well. And look, we've seen some really successful investments with Domicom and actually being part of them.
100%.
But
that is some really good stuff. And not just in the SDA. I don't want to talk, this is not just SDA. Domicom does all sorts of stuff out there. And they've made some really good products available to people who would never have had a hope of getting into those things without this fractional investment.
That's right. Yeah. And look, even I've looked at it, years and years ago when I was sort of thinking of doing that kind of thing, and I thought, how can I? Domicom was a good solution to do that. So the platform itself allows a really great opportunity. However, it's interesting to note here that by utilising third parties to raise funds and take advice on what that particular fund is going to purchase, they've made a couple of wrong turns. So by unpacking exactly what's happened here, and I'll give you guys the short version so that anyone that hasn't read the review sort of gets the picture. So ASR Wealth have advised, about some SDA properties that they'd like Domicom to put together a fractional investment fund to invest in. And those properties have been built and purchased through the fund with a range of different investors. And those properties have unfortunately been a bit of a dud in terms of being able to find tenants and actually get a return on those properties. So they're sat there vacant and costing the investors a lot of money. And these kinds of funds don't come without a fair few setup fees and management fees that are ongoing, regardless of whether there's an income coming in for the property. So what's happening is the investors are sort of sitting there going, well, we've forked out all of this money, A, for an investment and B, for your fees, and we're getting zero return and losing money daily. And that's primarily because the product that they've decided to build has been in a either oversupplied area by the looks of it in some of the suburbs they've mentioned, and have not been built to tenant demand.
Yep.
So it's an issue that you and I have talked about quite a lot. But this is just a different take on it, I suppose, having a fractional investment fund sort of caught up in it. So again,
Well,
it's
I mean, this is the thing. I mean, we were discussing just a moment ago off camera that it's a cautionary tale. You've got a big fund manager, and they employ a lot of smart people, right? There's no shortage of brains in places like this. And Domicom, you and I and Brett, my partner, and Phil and Greg, we've all spoken personally to Domicom, and we know their checks and balances. We know the compliance and the rigor they go through to make sure they don't get into situations like this. So
that's right. Yeah,
it's a tale of if the big end of town can get it wrong, then if you're a mum or dad investor, or you're a corporate entity that wants to put some of your earnings towards a SDA property, or you're a smaller group, right? It's absolutely possible you can as you said, make some wrong turns and mess this up. So
that's right.
How might have ASR Wealth and Domicom done this differently? And again, we're not trying to throw shade on these guys. It looks, for all intents and purposes, having read through the article, it looks like a really honest mistake. I didn't see anything malicious in anything like that. It just looks like they didn't have the right exposure to someone like an SDA provider like Disability Housing Solutions that said, "Ooh, are you going to build how many houses in that area? I wouldn't do that. Show me your plans." That's not the demand that we're seeing at the coalface. Let's talk about how we can tweak this. So where do you think they made wrong turns?
A sort of similar storyline to the mum and dad investors out there that are having a similar sort of experience is that it's the marketing teams that are putting together these house and land packages that are essentially doing that blindly. Like they are not at the end of the line where you find tenants and actually receive an income. They are at the front end where they sort of go, well, here's a patch of dirt and here's a house that'll fit on it. And so this should equal this in the price guide. And so if there's no one who really understands that tenant demand and that tenant market and that end outcome in that decision-making process at all before a purchase is made, then there's a huge risk there that they're going to make a decision that isn't actually meeting the market. And unfortunately, this is what I see that has happened here, is that the house and land package has been put together because it's available. It meets the financial feasibility of having a really great return, which is important for them to be able to say. But there's no one there doing a check and balance on, is there tenant demand there? And how can we shore that up before we actually put our investors into that product? So it's the same.
Tenant demand, it's not just, it's multifaceted in this industry. It's not just are there people in that area looking for a home. It's not a residential home. There's layers of what tenant demand looks like. So firstly, are there people in that area looking for an SDA home? Yes, no, okay. What kind? Right?
Yeah.
You can't just build a two-bedroom apartment and say move in, right? So it seems like that nuance in the DD hasn't been done. That's what it seems like. I'm not privy to any behind the door conversations between these entities and what happened.
No, and I think with two big organisations, and look, I haven't gone and checked, but have checked the references to who owns what component of each company, and there is a bit of cross reference there, which suggests to me that they've to a degree just gotten excited about the opportunity, but not then brought in a specialist there to double check their thinking, or a third party, an independent third party
Yeah.
is really what everyone should be thinking of doing before they make this big decision, whether it's a fractional fund, whether it's a full purchase outright, whether it's a block of apartments. You need to get a third party independent advice on this, that person isn't necessarily going to have a financial gain from you making that decision in the near future.
And that, I
really,
mean, that's a really good observation, right? The need for
Mm.
independent review on anything of significant value is really important.
Mm.
But someone like us, right? If they had said, okay, if Domicom had knocked on our door and said, hey, Disability Housing Solutions, we would like an independent review on this, and maybe you can even offer the SDA provision for this portfolio, right?
Mm.
We don't want to take on property that's going to sit there vacant for 2 years.
No.
We don't want
No.
to do that. So it's actually in our financial interests to say that property is not any good. We're
No,
happy to
exactly.
put it on the books, but it's going to sit there vacant, and then we're burning through administrative costs looking after an empty property. That doesn't
That's
work
right.
as a business, right? So
Yeah.
even on review, it's in the financial interests of that
Mm.
independent third party to give honest and fearless feedback about no, there's too many of these that you won't get 2 participants, you won't get 3, you'll get 1. This should be an apartment, that should be a granny flat, like all the different
Yeah.
bits and pieces
All
of
the
the
different
jigsaw puzzle.
scenarios.
Yeah.
Yeah. And look, I think that's why, personally, I feel like I'm in a really great position to be able to give that feedback, because if I set somebody's expectations up here for a property that really should be down here, I'm going to be the bad guy, which of course is not what I want, and I'm going to incur a lot of costs trying to make that expectation come to fruition, which is just it's a bad business strategy.
Yeah.
So if I'm giving you advice that is honest and realistic at that time, that's as best as I can do. And if that means saying to you, hey, look, I've come across 4 other properties in that estate or on that street, perhaps you should be reconsidering that location, or making sure your property has a fairly large point of difference in order to compete with the demand in that area. Or hey, a block of apartments out in the middle of the sticks is probably never going to fill at that level. So there is absolutely no reason why I would sugarcoat anything or set really high expectations of something being successful when I know deep down that that's going to be really expensive to achieve and is fairly unlikely to do so. So it's making sure that the people that are giving you the advice to purchase, or trying to get you into that decision, they're gaining financially immediately from that decision. So in commissions from sale, in build contracts, commissions from coming on board with them and rolling your superannuation into a certain fund. There's all sorts of little trails through a process like that to get your money into where they want you to spend it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if nothing happens, they've still got their money from you. So at the end of the day, if you get that advice from an SDA provider who knows the area, we don't get any money out of you until there's a tenant in there, right. until there's a service for us to give. Like, yes, there's some administration fees, but we're not in it for an upfront small administration fee to cover our time. We're in it to provide you a really long tenancy matching and property
It's a
management
20-year-long
agreement.
relationship.
That's right. So we're not going to give you advice just to get a little upfront fee from you. We're going to give you advice for a successful long-term relationship. And I think that's the difference between the two groups, is that everyone at that front end that's giving you that advice is collecting a fee from you immediately. But if you're getting third-party advice from people that want the long-term relationship with you, they're going to be more honest.
Yeah, I mean, we were having this conversation just yesterday. Yesterday we had a Disability Housing Solutions weekly team meeting, and there's 15, 18 people on the team call, and Phil, who mentioned is the font of all things wise and noble in this business. He still handles a lot of the customer facing initial inquiry and information calls, and he joined us late, quite upset that he'd spoken to another investor who'd been grifted and sold a property that was never going to perform as promised. But the person who sold him the property you know, these homes you see pop up on social media, you know, NDIS investments,
Yeah.
15% return, blah, 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 blah. The person
Yeah.
selling that home is likely making somewhere between $50,000 to $100,000 in various different ways they make money. Now, you and
Yeah.
I have been behind the curtain in this industry. That's just the numbers. We know
Mm.
how fees are loaded through the build process. We're
Yes.
intimately
Yeah.
aware of how that happens, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
50 or 100 grand all day long. And like Lauren just said, they're getting that as the build progresses. So by the time the build's finished, they're paid. So their
We're
motivation to
done.
you is they're now drop the mic there.
Yes.
They're
Messy
gone.
keys, good luck, goodbye. Yeah.
They got their
And that's
money,
okay. That's their business model.
right?
And we need those people in the industry to get these places out of the ground.
We do.
But
We do. And look,
yeah.
and again, not begrudging people for making a buck, because it's hard to make a buck.
No.
It's
And
when
it's a lot of work.
it's a lot of work. It's when they're doing it and they're knowingly lying
Mm.
or misrepresenting what's possible,
Mm.
then that's
Mm.
called grifting. Now,
Yeah.
I think I'm saying to throw around some words. I'm not trying to associate that with this Domacom situation. This is
Mm.
just the
Mm.
cautionary tale that says if someone at the big end of town with access to all the financial people and all the smart people and all the marketing people and all the lawyers, if they can get it wrong by not getting the right advice, and then
Mm.
someone like Domacom, who does such good work, and they're a really good organisation, they really are.
Mm.
If they
Mm.
can buy into this and raise money from the mum and dads who are now hurting because the whole thing hasn't worked, right?
Yeah.
All those wrong
Yeah.
turns taken. It's absolutely possible for Joe and Mary sitting in the lounge room out at, you know, Western Brisbane somewhere, or out at Geelong
Yeah.
in Victoria or whatever, to see one of these ads. It's absolutely possible to get it wrong,
And believe. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And the way through that to avoid taking those wrong turns is to pick up the phone, look on the internet, call, search SDA provider in XY's my area, and talk to an SDA
Mm.
provider about
Yeah.
what if I build this house in this location like this guy says, what would happen?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a message that you and I have been really trying to get out there, and it is a part of our reason for doing this podcast, is to help people have an information source that is at that end of the line. Because, you know, like I said, those companies that collect their fees up front, we need them in the industry. It's a necessary component of getting these things done. But if you're not getting that piece of information that puts the last piece of the puzzle together, which actually gets your funding through, then, you know, you're doing yourself a disservice. And, you know, Domacom, like you said, they've fallen victim to it as well.
I had a mentor once years and years ago, and one of his favorite things to say, and this was in the context of property development and building townhouse projects and land subdivisions, and it was always, Dave, you've got to start with the end in mind, right?
Yes.
So look at where it's going to be at the end, and does it work? Is it viable at the end? Don't look at all the numbers you might make in the front. That's candy on the shelf. It's just distracting. Start with the end.
Great if it works.
So in this context, you look at, okay, I'm going to build an SDA property in Western Melbourne or Mackay or Townsville or wherever, right? And the question to ask is, if I build this house in this area, am I going to get the advertised number of tenants or participants in that properties? How do I test that claim? Start with the end. So that's when and like you've just said, SDA providers are at the end of the line. They're the ones who find the participants to live in the property and manage it for you for the next 20 years. That's the end of the line.
Right.
Start there, work your way backwards.
Yeah, and Dave, you and I had a really good conversation with a friend of ours in the industry, David Whitelaw from Adapt, a couple of weeks ago, and it was a discussion of a similar topic line was, you know, how can we support the industry as that end of the line component to making this all work, make better decisions, so that we've got a really solid SDA industry that is providing much needed accommodation to you know, support vulnerable people in housing across the country.
Yeah,
So, you know, I think
it's a really good point, because also there are SDA providers out there who aren't doing the right thing, just like there's developers out there not doing the right thing.
yeah,
So
and SCA providers that are linked to a property marketing group, that to me says, well, they're not really independent. They're not really that third party independent advice person you're looking for.
Yeah.
You do need to go outside of that if there's links between the two.
That's right. No, they've got a dog in the fight at that point. So it's beneficial for them to sort of say, yes, buy this house, because they're still collecting
Yes.
all those fees.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
All right. So look, I think
So,
that's about 20 minutes, mate. So
oh,
I think
it's so fast.
it does. I've got to keep checking the clock, because it does. It just disappears, and before we know it, we're having an hour-long chat. So
Yeah.
so I think, you know, the summary from this is, if it can happen to the big end of town, it can certainly happen to you if you're a mum and dad investor. So please, 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 please call an SDA provider who you think they know what they're talking about, whether it's us or not us. We're really not fussed. We just want you to not get swindled or grifted or take a wrong turn or make a bad choice.
Yep, absolutely.
So until next time.
Until next time, thank you, Dave. Good
See you
conversation
later.
as always. Okay, bye.